The night my family finally shattered. My son was standing in the middle of his own kitchen, begging me to stop talking. Celeste had her hand wrapped around his arm, her voice all soft and worried, telling him his mother was losing her mind. She kept saying it. She's confused, Everett. She's not well. She needs help. And I looked at the boy I raised alone, the boy I put through college working double shifts at the hospital, and I said the words that can never be unsaid. Everett, I spent 40 years in a trauma unit reading blood before breakfast. Read is type AB. You are type O. A father who is type O can never, not once in a million years, make a child who is type AB. That little boy you call your son has never carried a single drop of your blood, and the woman standing right beside you has known it since the night he was born. My name is Adelaide Hollis, though nobody has called me Adelaide since my mother passed. To everyone who matters, I am just Addie. I am 67 years old, and I spent almost 4 decades as a trauma and ICU nurse, the kind who holds a stranger's hand while the monitors scream, the kind who has told more mothers than I can count that their child did not make it. I have watched people take their last breath, and I have watched them claw their way back from the edge, and I honestly believed there was nothing left in this world that could knock me flat on my back. I was wrong about that. I was wrong about a lot of things. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments. And please, stay with me until the end. Because long before I stood in that kitchen, before the blood and the truth and the running through an airport, I had already become a ghost in my own family. And the worst part is, I did not even see it happening. My husband Wendell died 6 years ago. Heart attack, fast, right out there in the vegetable garden he loved more than he loved sitting still. One minute he was fussing about the tomatoes and the next he was just gone. And I was a widow at 61 with a stethoscope still hanging around my neck. Everybody kept telling me how strong I was at the funeral. I have noticed over the years that strong is what people call a woman when they need her to keep holding up everyone else. So that is exactly what I did. I went back to work. I kept the house running. I remembered the birthdays, and I mailed the cards, and I drove casseroles clear across town every single time somebody in the family came down with something. That was my whole life, if I am being honest with you. I was the quiet engine in the back of the room that nobody ever thinks about until the day it stops running. 3 years back, I finally hung it up and retired from the hospital. 40 years of night shifts will wear a body right down to the bolts, and my knees had a whole lot of opinions about all that concrete flooring. I remember driving home that very last night thinking, well, now I finally have time. Time for my son. Time for my grandbabies. I had this whole picture painted in my head. Sunday dinners and school plays, and teaching little Reed how to put tomato plants in the ground the same way his grandfather once taught me. I did not know it yet, but wanting to be close to those kids turned out to be the single most dangerous thing I ever did, because there was somebody inside that family who needed me kept far, far away, and me suddenly having free time scared her half to death. Let me tell you about my son. Everett is 39 now. I raised him mostly on my own after his father walked out when he was small, and Wendell came into our lives later and loved that boy like he made him himself. Everett grew up sweet and steady and just a touch too trusting, the kind of man who assumes everybody is telling him the truth, because it would never in 1,000 years occur to him to lie to them. When he was younger, he called me twice a week just to hear my voice. We had a standing dinner every other Sunday before he got married, just the two of us. And he would ask me about my shift and tell me about his, and we would sit there laughing until the sky went dark outside the window. He was my son and my best friend, and the thing I was proudest of in this entire world. And I need you to understand about Reed, because this right here is the part that still cracks me wide open. When Reed was born, I was in that delivery room. Celeste wanted me there, or at least that is what she said back then. And I held her hand, and I talked her through her breathing the way I had done for 100 strangers. And when that baby finally came, it was my two hands that caught him. The doctor let me cut the cord. I was the very first person on God's green earth to hold Reed Hollis. I wrapped him up tight and I looked down into that scrunched up little face and I felt something break open in my chest that had been sealed shut since the day Wendell died. That was my grandson. I did not care one bit about anything printed on any chart. I loved that boy from his first breath, and I have never once stopped, not for a second. Not even after I learned the truth that blew my whole life apart. You hold on to that. Now, Celeste, my son met her in the spring of 2017, and it happened fast, faster than anything I have ever watched in my life. Inside a few months, they were engaged. Inside the year, they were married. At the time, I told myself it was romantic. Love doesn't sit around and wait, I said. But looking back now, I can see it plain as day for what it really was. That woman did not fall in love with my son. She landed on him, the way a hawk lands on something it has already decided to carry off. She was good. I will hand her that much. Warm and pretty, and she said every single right thing straight to my face. But almost from the jump, little pieces of my son started going missing. First, it was the Sunday dinners. Celeste has been planning these big fancy meals at home. Everett told me she loves having me all to herself on the weekends. So every other Sunday quietly turned into once a month. Then the phone calls got shorter and shorter. Sorry, Ma, cannot really talk right now. Celeste has got us running all over the place today. He never said one unkind word. That is not how the woman operated. It all lived in the spaces between the words, in the plans that kept rearranging themselves so slick that I always ended up on the outside of the glass, looking in at my own family. And she had this way of hugging me at gatherings that went on just a beat too long. Her hand rubbing slow circles on my back like I was some fragile old thing that might crack. She would swoop right in when I was talking to the kids and steer them off towards something shinier. Grandma Addie has had herself a long day. Sweethearts, go on and show your daddy your drawing instead. And I would stand there with my mouth halfway open, feeling like I had just been politely erased in my own son's living room. Here is the piece that turns my stomach now. Looking back, she had started something else too, something quiet as a whisper, something I did not catch until it was nearly too late. She had started telling people I was slipping, going soft in the head, always so kind about it, always so terribly concerned. Addie seemed a little confused at the grocery store the other day. I found the stove burner left on over at her place. Thank the Lord I happened to stop by. Do we really think she should still be driving all that way by herself? Not a word of it was true. Not one. But she said it so sweet. And she said it so often that people just started nodding right along. Even my own sister. Carlene is 63, and she and I have talked on the phone nearly every day of our grown lives. One afternoon she said to me, real gentle, Addie, honey, are you sure you are keeping up with everything okay? Celeste mentioned you have been forgetting things. And I felt the floor tip just a little under my feet. My own baby sister looking at me sideways. All because that woman had dropped a poison seed in her ear and let it grow. The only soul who never once doubted me was Franny Boyd. Franny and I nursed side by side for 25 years, and she knows my mind is sharp as a fresh scalpel because she stood right next to me running codes at 3 in the morning without so much as a tremble in my hands. Franny would lean across the diner table and say, Addie, that girl is running a con on your entire family, and you are the only one at the table who can even see the board. I told her she was being dramatic. God above, I wish I had listened to her. Because by the time my son sat me down one evening, wearing that worried face, and asked me straight out, Ma, be honest with me, are you forgetting things lately? I finally understood that the ground had already moved clean out from under my feet. Somebody had spent years, patient and careful and cruel, teaching my family to see me as a problem to be managed instead of a woman to be loved. And I still did not know why. All I knew was that the woman who married my son was building towards something, and I was standing square in the middle of her path. I had no idea the whole thing was about to blow apart in a hospital hallway, over one single line printed on a lab report. But before that hospital hallway, Before the truth came spilling out all over the floor, there was the birthday party. And that party is where I first started to understand that something in my family had gone rotten, even if I could not yet see the shape of it. Reed was turning 8. My grandson, my whole heart, the boy whose first breath I caught in my own 2 hands. I had been counting down to his party for 2 solid weeks. I tracked down this telescope for him, a real one, not some flimsy plastic junk off the drugstore shelf. Because all that summer, the boy had gone crazy for the moon and the planets. And he would call me up out of nowhere just to ask me why Mars looked red. I spent a whole lot more than I should have, and I did not care one lick. I wrapped it up myself in blue paper covered in little silver stars, and I set it right by my front door so I would not walk out without it. Though heaven knows I have never once forgotten a single thing that had to do with that child. Celeste told me the party was Sunday at 2 o'clock. She told me twice. Once on the phone, and once in a text message that I still have to this day. Hold on to that little detail, because it is going to matter a lot more than you think. So Sunday rolls around, one of those mild January afternoons that barely counts as winter down where we live, and I pull into their driveway at 10 till 2, that big wrapped box riding shotgun beside me, wearing the good blouse Wendell always swore brought out my eyes. And the very first thing that hit me was the cars. Cars were pulling out. A minivan was backing down the street. A couple of tired-looking mamas were loading sticky kids into car seats. And one little girl walked past me, clutching a goodie bag and a balloon that was already going soft and wrinkled. My stomach did this slow, sick roll. Because let me tell you, a party that is just getting started does not have people walking out of it. I sat in my car for a second, feeling stupid, feeling something worse than stupid. Then I picked up that telescope and I walked around the side of the house toward the back gate because I could hear voices out on the patio. And that is where I stopped cold, because the voice I heard was Celeste. And Celeste was talking about me. She had that sweet, syrupy tone she saves for when she is sticking the knife in. Bless her heart, she was saying. I told her 2 different times and I even texted her, but you know how she gets now. She probably wrote it down wrong again. Everett and I just worry so much. And then I heard my own sister, my Carlene, make this soft little sympathetic sound, this poor thing, that landed on me like a slap across the face. Standing there behind that gate with a telescope in my arms, I felt every ounce of blood drain straight out of me, because I was not confused. I want you to understand that with everything in you. I was not foggy. I was not slipping. I had not written down one single thing wrong. That woman looked me dead in the eyes and told me 2 o'clock, twice, and then threw a party at 11 in the morning, so that when I showed up right on time, I would look like a doddering old fool who could not read a calendar. She had built a little trap and she had baited it with my own grandson, and I had walked straight into the teeth of it wearing my nice blouse. I could have turned around right then. Part of me wishes I had, to be honest. But that boy was in there, so I straightened my back and I walked through that gate anyway. And there was Reed, running across the yard in a paper crown. And when he saw me, his whole face lit up like Christmas morning. "Grandma Addie," he hollered, and he threw his arms around my legs. And for 1 second, everything else just fell away. I got down on my creaky old knees and I gave him that telescope and I watched him tear into the paper. And it was worth every dime and every bit of the humiliation to see his eyes go big and round. But over the top of his head, I could see the grown-ups watching me. Watching me the way you watch a sick relative you are not sure about. And then Everett came over, and my sweet trusting son put his hand on my shoulder and said, real gentle, real careful, "Ma, the party was this morning. I thought Celeste texted you." And I said, "Everett, she texted me 2 o'clock. I can show you right now." And I dug out my phone with my hands shaking, and I pulled up that message. And do you know what it said? It said Sunday, 2 p.m., see you there. Plain as day. And Celeste came drifting over with her head tilted all sympathetic, and she said, "Oh, sweetie, no, I sent you the 11 o'clock one right after that. You must not have seen it come through." And there was no such message. There was no second text. She stood in her own backyard and lied straight to my face in front of my son. And my son looked at me like I was the one who was cracked. That right there is the thing I need you to sit with, because I have thought about it 1,000 times since. It was not enough for her to leave me out. She had to make it look like it was my own doing. She had to make everybody there feel sorry for poor, forgetful Addie, who cannot keep her days straight anymore. She did not just want me gone. She wanted a reason, and if there was not one, she was more than happy to build one out of nothing. I drove home that night and I did not cry, which surprised me some. I was too busy getting mad. And when I get mad, 40 years of trauma nursing kicks in, and I stop feeling and I start thinking, because that is what you do when everything is falling apart around you, and you cannot afford to fall apart with it. So I sat down at my kitchen table and I started laying it all out. Every strange little thing from the past year, like I was piecing together a patient's chart. And oh, once I started really looking, it made me sick. A few weeks back, Everett had called me, all worked up because Celeste told him I left a burner blazing on the stove during a visit and nearly burned the house down. Except I had not been to their house in over a month, and I sure as hell had not been near that stove. There was the time he asked me, worried as could be, why I had forgotten to pick Reed up from his soccer practice, left the poor kid standing at the curb. Except nobody ever asked me to pick that child up. Not one time. There was a whole rambling phone call I supposedly made to Celeste late one night, saying all kinds of confused things. A call I have no memory of because it never happened. Every single one of these little incidents had the exact same shape. Celeste tells Everett something. Everett gets worried. And one more brick gets laid in this wall they were building around the idea that Addie is losing her marbles. I called Franny that night, and I told her all of it, and Franny went quiet for a long minute. Then she said, Addie, listen to me real careful. That is not somebody being forgetful, and it is not somebody being careless. That is somebody building a case. And when I asked her building a case for what, she said, honey, people do not go to that much trouble to make an old woman look crazy unless they are getting ready to need her to be crazy. Unless they want folks to have already stopped believing a single word she says. I sat there in the dark of my kitchen with that phone against my ear, and I felt the hair stand up on my arms, because I knew she was right. This was not jealousy, and it was not some petty family squabble. This was patient. This was careful. This was a woman who had spent 2 years quietly, sweetly, teaching everybody I loved to see me as a problem to be managed instead of a person to be believed. And she had done such a fine job of it that my own son and my own baby sister were already halfway convinced. But here is what kept me up staring at the ceiling that whole night. Why? What in God's name did she need me discredited for? What was she so scared I might see, or say, or figure out, that she had to burn down my good name before I ever got the chance? I did not have that answer yet. I would not have it for weeks. And when I finally got it, standing under those cold fluorescent lights in a hospital hallway, it would turn out to be so much worse than anything my mind could have cooked up sitting at that kitchen table. Because the reason that woman needed nobody to believe me was the one secret that could blow her entire life to pieces. And I was the only person in that whole family with the eyes to see it coming. It happened on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after that birthday party. I was standing at my kitchen sink rinsing a coffee cup when my phone lit up with Everett's name, and the second I picked up and heard his voice, every hair on my body stood straight up. 40 years of nursing teaches you to read a voice the way other folks read a face, and my son's voice was pure animal panic. Ma, he said, and it came out cracked and high and wrong. Ma, it's Reed. He fell, there's an ambulance. We're going to Mercy West. Please, Ma, I need you. I do not even remember grabbing my keys. I do not remember the drive. 1 minute I was at my sink, and the next I was pushing through the emergency room doors at Mercy West. The same kind of doors I had walked through 10,000 times in my life. Except this time it was my grandbabies and somewhere on the other side of them. And my legs felt like they were made out of wet paper. Here is the thing they do not tell you about spending your whole career in a place. when it is finally your own blood on the table. All that knowledge does not comfort you one bit. It just means you understand exactly how bad things can get. I heard the words the triage nurse said to the resident as I came through, and my brain translated them before my heart could catch up. Fall from height, roughly 12 feet, off the top of a backyard play structure. Distended abdomen, tachycardic, BP dropping. And I knew, God help me, I knew before anybody said it out loud. That is a ruptured spleen. That is a belly filling with blood on the inside where you cannot see it and cannot press on it and cannot do one single thing to stop it with your bare hands. That is the kind of thing that takes a child fast, if the wrong minutes stack up on you. They had him in a trauma bay, with the curtain half pulled, and there were too many people around that little body, which is how you know it is real bad. And I could see his sneakers, just his little sneakers sticking out past the end of the bed, one of them untied. And something about that untied shoe damn near put me on the floor. Celeste was pressed up against the wall with both hands over her mouth. Junie was crying in a chair. And Everett, my Everett, had his hands buried in his hair, pacing a little 6-foot track back and forth like a man trying to outrun his own skin. They were moving him towards surgery. I heard the surgeon rattling it off. Exploratory lap, possible splenectomy. And I heard the words type and cross and transfuse. And that is when my son came apart at the seams. He grabbed the first scrubs he could reach, this poor young nurse. And he said, take mine. Take my blood. I'm O negative. I'm a universal donor. I give every 8 weeks. Take whatever he needs. Take all of it. And the nurse, bless her, she was kind about it. She said, sir, we've already got him covered. We keep O negative on the shelf for exactly this. We don't have time to draw and process a donor right now, but thank you. And Everett just kept saying it anyway. I'm O negative. Take mine. Like, if he said it enough times, it would give him something to do besides stand there and be helpless. And I want to stop right here for 1 second, because this part matters more than almost anything in the whole story. My son was not lying and he was not confused. Everett Hollis is O negative and he has been proud of it his entire adult life. He started donating blood in college and never quit. He carried that little donor card in his wallet like it was a badge, because being a universal donor made him feel like he mattered, like his body could save a stranger he would never even meet. I knew his blood type the way I knew his birthday. I am his mother and I am a nurse. There was not one shred of doubt in my mind about what ran in my son's veins. Type O. You hold on to that, because it is about to become the axis the entire world spins on. They wheeled Reed off toward the operating room, and I caught just one glimpse of his face, gray and slack, that paper crown from 3 weeks ago, somehow the only thing my mind could think of. And then the doors swallowed him, and we were left out there in that awful bright hallway to wait. And waiting is the cruelest thing there is. I have watched 100 families do it, and now I was one of them, sitting in a hard plastic chair under those humming lights, holding my son's shaking hand, praying to a God I was not sure I even believed in anymore. It was somewhere in that endless stretch of waiting that a nurse came out with a clipboard to square away the paperwork and the blood bank details, the way they do, confirming what they had given and what they had on hold. And she was reading off his information in that flat, professional voice. And she said it just as plain and ordinary as anything. Patient blood type AB positive. We've got units held in reserve if the OR calls for more. AB positive. I heard it, and at first it did not land. It just sort of floated there in the air in front of me. And then real slow, like ice water, starting at the top of my skull and running all the way down my spine. 40 years of training did the math whether I wanted it to or not. Reed is AB. Everett is O. And a father who is type O cannot make a child who is type AB. Not ever. Not once. It is not rare. It is not a long shot. It is not one of those medical things that happens one time in a million. It is flat out impossible. A person with type O blood carries 2O genes, and 2O genes is all he has got to give. He cannot hand down an A and he cannot hand down a B because there is no A and no B anywhere inside him to hand down. And a type AB child has to get an A from one parent and a B from the other. Has to. There is no other road to AB. So whoever put that A and that B into Reed, one thing was carved in stone under those fluorescent lights. It was not my son. I sat there in that plastic chair and I swear to you, the whole hallway tilted sideways. My ears started ringing. Everett was still talking beside me, saying something about the surgeon, and his voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a swimming pool. Because I understood, all at once, sitting there, that the little boy I caught in my own 2 hands 8 years ago, the child whose first breath was mine, the grandson I loved more than my own life, was not my son's son, had never been. And somewhere in the back of my reeling mind, another door was already creaking open, a door I did not want to look through. Because if Reed was not Everett's, then Celeste had known it. Since the night he was born, she had known it. She had looked my trusting son in the eye and let him name that baby and raise that baby and love that baby, all built on a lie the size of the sky. And then the second door, the one that put the whole rotten picture together and made me want to be sick right there on that hospital floor. Because now I finally understood why. Why the burner she said I left on. Why the soccer pickup that never happened. Why the phone call I never made. Why she had spent 2 solid years, sweet as pie, teaching my son and my sister and everybody I loved that poor old Addie was losing her mind. It was not jealousy. It was not spite. She was not scared of me being close to the kids because she was possessive. She was scared of me being close to the kids because I am a 40-year trauma nurse, and I am the one single person in that entire family who could look at a lab report and know in half a second what nobody else would ever think to check. She had to make sure that if I ever opened my mouth, not one living soul would believe a word that came out of it. She had built my cage 2 years in advance, brick by careful brick, for this exact moment. And that is the part that took the breath clean out of me. Sitting in that chair holding my son's hand while his boy was on an operating table. I had the truth. I had the whole terrible truth in my hands. And I was the last person on earth anyone would believe if I said it out loud. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. I closed my mouth, and I squeezed my son's hand, and I said not one word. Because Reed was still in surgery, still fighting for his little life behind those doors. And there is a time for the truth, and there is a time to just get a child through the night. This was the second kind. The truth could wait a few more hours. I did not know yet that keeping quiet in that hallway was going to cost me nearly everything I had left. Reed made it through the night. Around 2 in the morning, the surgeon came out still in her cap, tired but with the good kind of tired in her eyes. And she told us they had to take the spleen. But they got the bleeding stopped and the boy was stable and he was going to be just fine. And Everett folded right in half and sobbed into my shoulder like he was 6 years old again. And I held my son and I stroked his hair and I cried too. Real tears. Because whatever else was true, that baby was going to live. That part was pure and simple and I let myself have it. But underneath the relief, that lab report was sitting in my chest like a swallowed stone. A positive. I could not put it down and I could not unknow it. And every time I looked at Celeste across that waiting room, dabbing at her eyes, playing the frantic mother, I felt something cold and hard settle into me. Because she had known this for 8 years. She had stood in a delivery room and let me catch a baby that was not my son's, and she had smiled and thanked me for it. I want to tell you I was smart about what came next. I was not. I was a woman running on no sleep and 40 years of always being the one who fixes things. And I made the single biggest mistake of the whole ordeal. I opened my mouth too soon, to the wrong person, with nothing in my hand to back me up. It was 2 days later. Reed was up in a recovery room doing better, cracking little jokes, asking for pudding. And Everett and I were down in the cafeteria getting coffee that tasted like burnt pennies. And it just came pouring out of me, because I could not hold it one more second. I said, Everett, honey, I have to tell you something and I need you to really hear me. When they read Reed's blood type in the ER, they said AB. And baby, you are type O. A typo father cannot have an AB child. It is not possible. It is not a maybe. It is a hard biological fact. Everett, I do not think Reed is yours. I watched my son's face, and I will carry that look to my grave. First it went blank, then it went confused, and then slow and terrible. It closed up like a fist. And he said, real quiet, Ma, do you even hear yourself right now? And I said, Everett, please, just ask a doctor, ask anybody in this building. They will tell you the exact same thing I am telling you. And that is when he stood up from that little cafeteria table, and his voice was shaking. And he said the thing that broke me clean in two. He said, Celeste told me you would do something like this. I sat there with my burnt coffee and I could not even speak. He said, she told me you have been getting worse, that you have been saying paranoid things, that you might try to hurt her somehow because you have never really accepted her. And I told her no, not my mom. My mom would never. And now here you are, my son sitting in a hospital, my boy who almost died 2 days ago. And you pick this exact moment to tell me my wife tricked me into raising some other man's kid. Do you have any idea how sick that is, Ma? Do you have any idea what you sound like? And there it was. There was the whole trap she had spent 2 years building, snapping shut on me with a sound I could feel in my teeth. She had gotten to him first. She had planted the seed so deep and so early that when the truth finally came, my own son heard it as proof that his poor crazy mother had finally gone off the deep end. I had walked right into it exactly the way she planned. The more true and shocking the thing I said, the crazier it made me look. She had turned my own knowledge into the rope to hang me with. It got worse from there, and it got worse fast. Because Celeste did not sit still. That woman never sat still. Within a week, she had spun the whole thing into her own story. And in her story, I was the villain. A bitter, unstable old woman who had crashed her grandson's medical emergency to spew hateful lies and accuse a grieving mother of unspeakable things. And people believed her, because she had spent 2 years getting them ready to believe exactly this. She called me one evening, sweet as ever, that syrup back in her voice, and she said, Addie, we think it is best if you take some space from the kids right now. Reed is fragile after his surgery, and the things you have been saying are just so upsetting. And until you are feeling more like yourself, we really need to keep things calm for him. Keep things calm for him, as if I were a danger, as if I, the woman who caught that boy at birth and would have laid down in traffic for him, were somebody the child needed protecting from. And then came the part that told me just how far she was willing to go. Carlene called me, my own sister, and she was crying. And she said, Addie, I don't know how to say this, but Everett has been talking to a lawyer about you. He mentioned something about getting you evaluated, about whether you can still make your own decisions. He said the word guardianship, and I sat down hard on my kitchen floor with the phone in my hand, right down on the linoleum, because I understood at last exactly what all those bricks had been for. She did not just want me discredited. She wanted me declared incompetent. She wanted a piece of paper, signed by a judge. That, said Addie Hollis, is not of sound mind. So that anything I ever said about that blood type or that baby could be waved away as the ramblings of a woman who was legally out of her head. It was the perfect insurance policy. And she had talked my own son into being the one to file it. I laid there on that cold floor for a long time. I am not going to lie to you and pretend I was strong in that moment, because I was not. There was a stretch, an hour maybe, where I sat in the dark and actually wondered if maybe I was the crazy one. Maybe I did misremember the birthday time. Maybe I was slipping and just could not feel it happening. That is the truly evil genius of what she did. She did not just make everybody else doubt me. She got so far inside my head that for one black hour she almost made me doubt myself. And let me tell you, when you have spent 40 years being the sharpest, steadiest person in the room, the one everybody else leaned on, there is no fear on this earth quite like the fear that your own mind might be turning against you. But then something happened, and thank God it did. I was sitting there on that floor, and my eyes landed on the little framed photo I keep on the counter. the one of me in my scrubs the day I retired, Franny's arms slung around my shoulders, both of us grinning like fools. And I heard Franny's voice in my head, plain as if she were sitting right there. That girl is running a con, Addie, and you are the only one who can see the board. And something in me just went cold and clear and hard, the way it used to go the second a trauma came rolling through the doors. Because I might have been outmaneuvered. I might have been alone. But I was not crazy, and I was not wrong. And I was sure as hell not going to lie down on my kitchen floor and let that woman put me away. I have watched people die. I have held their hands while they went. And I have seen enough in this life to know one thing for certain. The truth does not care how many people are lined up against it. Typo cannot make a B. That fact did not give one damn about Celeste's sweet voice or my son's anger or how many people she had whispered to. It was just true, sitting there, waiting, and all I had to do was find a way to make it undeniable to a man who had been trained not to believe a single word out of my mouth. So I picked myself up off that floor. I called Franny, and I did not cry. I got to work. I said, Franny, I need help, and I need somebody who finds things out for a living. Because I cannot do this alone, and I cannot walk into that house and demand a DNA test on a child they will not even let me see. Franny was quiet for a second. Then she said, I know a guy. Retired detective, does private work now, quiet and careful and good. And the next morning, I sat across a diner booth from a soft-spoken man with gray in his beard and tired, kind eyes. And I laid the whole thing out for him, every brick, every lie, the blood type, all of it. He listened to the end without interrupting once. Then he set down his coffee and he said something I did not expect. He said, Mrs. Hollis, before we go trying to prove anything about that little boy, I think the first thing we ought to do is find out who your daughter-in-law actually is. Because a woman who plans this careful, who covers her tracks this good, this is almost never her first time doing it. I did not know it yet, sitting in that booth. But he had just pulled the first thread on a sweater that was about to unravel all the way down to the skin. And what we found underneath was so much bigger and so much darker than one lie about one baby. The detective's name was Roland Pike, and it took him 11 days to blow my daughter-in-law's whole life wide open. I paid him out of the savings Wendell left me, and I want to tell you it was the best money I have ever spent. Because what that quiet man laid across my kitchen table in a manila folder changed everything. He came by on a rainy Thursday evening, and he did not waste time on small talk. He sat down, opened that folder, and he said, Mrs. Hollis, the woman your son married is not named Celeste Marsh. That is a name she started using about 9 years ago, right before she met your boy. Her real name is Bonnie Ratliff. And then he slid a photo across the table, some old DMV picture, and it was her, younger and harder around the eyes, with darker hair and a look on her face I had never once seen her wear in my son's house. A hungry look, a cornered look. I sat there staring at that picture of a stranger who had been eating Thanksgiving dinner at my table for 8 years. Bonnie Ratliff. Even the name felt like a slap, like everything I thought I knew had just been peeled back to show something else underneath. But he was not done. He said, here is the part you are going to want to sit down for, except I was already sitting. So I just gripped the edge of that table. He said, Bonnie Ratliff is still legally married to a man named Dale Ferris, out in another state. They wed 11 years back, and there is no record of a divorce anywhere. Not a filing, not a decree, nothing. Which means, Mrs. Hollis, when she stood up in front of a preacher and married your son, she already had a living husband she had never divorced. That marriage of theirs is not just built on a lie. In the eyes of the law, it is not even a real marriage. It is bigamy. It is a crime. I had to put my hand flat on the table to steady myself. Because do you understand what he had just handed me? For weeks I had been the crazy one, the paranoid one, the bitter old woman making wild accusations with nothing to back her up. And now here was cold, hard proof, in public records, that the woman running my family was a fraud living under a fake name with a husband she had conveniently forgotten to mention. This was not a memory. This was not a feeling. This was documents. And documents do not slip. Documents do not forget the birthday time. For the first time in weeks, I had something in my hand that no amount of sweet talk could wave away. But Roland Pike still was not finished. And this next part is the one that hollowed me out, because it turned out this whole thing had another victim in it, one nobody had ever even thought to grieve for. He said, "I traced her backward, Mrs. Hollis, through every place she lived before she showed up in your son's life. And there is a gap, right around 2016 and 2017, where she was with a man named Grady Merritt, lived with him the better part of 2 years. And by every account I can find, they were serious. He thought they were building a life. And then it's real sudden, right around the spring of 2017, she vanished on him, cleaned out their shared savings account, and disappeared without a word. And Mrs. Hollis, the spring of 2017 is the exact same time she landed in your son's world. I did the math before he even said it, because by then I had gotten good at doing terrible math in my head. Spring of 2017, she leaves this Grady Merritt. That same spring, she meets my Everett and sweeps him off his feet at a dead sprint. Reed is born the following January, and a baby born in January was made the spring before. She did not fall for my son. She ran to my son, already carrying another man's child, and she needed a father for that baby fast. So she found the sweetest, most trusting man she could get her hooks into, and she reeled him in before the belly ever started to show. And Grady Merritt, that poor man, Roland found him, still living in the same town. And when he made contact and started asking careful questions, the truth came out slow and awful. Because Grady did not run off and abandon a pregnant girlfriend. Grady never knew there was a baby at all. Bonnie had told him, right before she vanished, that she had lost the pregnancy, that there had been a miscarriage, that it was too painful to talk about. And then a few weeks later, she was simply gone. And he spent years thinking she had left because the grief had broken them. He mourned a child he thought was dead. He mourned a woman who had robbed him and lied to his face. And the whole entire time, 8 full years, that child was alive and well and calling another man daddy just a few hundred miles up the road. When Roland told me that, I had to get up and stand at my kitchen window in the dark because I could not sit still with it. I thought about that little boy I caught at birth. I thought about a father out there somewhere who had grieved him like a ghost. And I thought about the woman who had done all of it to Grady, to my son, to me, to 2 innocent kids. And I felt a rage so clean and so total that it actually calmed me right down. Because now I was not just fighting for my own name anymore. Now I was fighting for a man who had lost a son he never even knew he had. Roland arranged it, and a few days later I met Grady Merritt myself, in that same diner booth where all of this had started. He was a big, quiet man, maybe 42, with careful eyes and hands he did not seem to know what to do with. And when I told him, gently, everything, that his son was alive, that his name was Reed, that he was 8 years old and loved the moon and the planets and had just come through surgery like a little champion, that big man put his face in those restless hands and he wept. Right there in a diner over a plate of eggs he never touched. He wept for 8 lost years, and I reached across that table and I held onto his arm. One stranger to another, 2 people that woman had wounded, finally sitting on the same side of it. And that is when I knew I finally had enough. I had the blood type. I had the fake name. I had the bigamy in black and white public record. I had a biological father with a story that lined up on every single date. I had a wall of truth so high that not even Celeste, or Bonnie, or whoever she was, could talk her way over it. It was time to stop hiding and time to put it in front of my son, whether he was ready to hear it or not. I went to his house on a Saturday. He did not want to let me in. I could see it on his face through the screen door, that mix of anger and worry. Poor, forgetful, dangerous Ma showing up on the porch. But I looked him dead in the eye and I said, "Everett, I have proof, real proof, on paper, and if you love your children even 1 ounce, you will give your mother 10 minutes. Something in my voice must have cut through, because he stepped back and he let me in, and I laid it all out on his coffee table. I told him it started weeks ago, in that hospital hallway, with a single line on a lab report. Everett, I said, you are type O and that boy is type AB, and a type O father cannot make an AB child. Not once, not ever. That is not a memory and it is not a feeling. It is biology, and I believe she has known it since the night Reed was born. And then I showed him the rest. The DMV photo, the marriage certificate with Dale Ferris, the public record showing no divorce, the timeline, and I told him about Grady. I watched my son's whole world come apart right there on his living room couch. I watched him pick up that marriage certificate and read it 3 times like the words might rearrange themselves into something bearable. And Celeste came flying into the room, and the mask cracked right off her face, and she started swinging wild. She said it was all forged, that I had cooked it up, that I had hired some con man to fabricate lies because I had always hated her. She grabbed Everett's arm and she said, "Baby, your mother is sick. She has finally lost it completely. Look what she is doing to us." But here is the thing. Everett was not looking at me anymore, and he was not looking at her either. He was looking at that piece of paper, and in a voice I had never heard come out of my son, low and flat and dead, he said, "Celeste, or Bonnie, or whatever the hell your name even is. This is a marriage certificate with your face on it and another man's name, and it was filed 2 years before you ever met me." And she had nothing. For the first time in 8 years, that woman opened her mouth and nothing came out. I wish I could tell you my son fell into my arms and thanked me. He did not. That is not how real life goes. And I promised you the truth. Everett turned on me too, in that moment, because a drowning man will grab at anybody. He said, "Why? Ma, why did you have to be the one to bring this into my house? Why couldn't you just leave it alone?" And there were tears running down his face while he said it, and it damn near killed me, because I knew the anger was not really at me. It was at her. It was at himself. It was at 8 years of his life turning to smoke. He was not thanking me. He was grieving. And sometimes grief comes out looking exactly like blame, but then shaking, white as a sheet. My son did the one thing that mattered. He set down that certificate, and he looked at me, and he looked at Reed's bedroom door down the hall, and he said, real quiet, "I have to know for sure. Not from a blood type, not from a piece of paper. For sure." And he picked up his phone, and with his own 2 hands, he made the call to set up a real DNA test on his son. He still did not know that whilst he was dialing, the woman he married had already gone quiet in a way that should have scared us all. Because Bonnie Ratliff had done this before, and a woman like that does not stick around to lose. She starts packing. The DNA test came back 4 days later, and it said what I already knew in my bones. Grady Merritt was Reed's father, 99.99%. There was no wiggle room in that number, no sweet voice on earth that could talk around it. It was the same cold certainty as that blood type in the ER, except now it was stamped on official paper with my son's own name on the request line, because he was the one who asked for it. Nobody could ever call it my paranoid lie again. But we did not even make it to the results before everything came to a head, because Bonnie did exactly what a cornered animal does. She ran. It was the night after Everett confronted her with that marriage certificate. He had told her, cold and final, that he wanted her out, that he was calling a lawyer of his own in the morning, a real one this time, and that until they sorted out what happened next, she could sleep in the guest room. And my son, God love his trusting heart, actually believed she would just go to sleep down the hall. He did not understand yet what I had come to understand about her. That woman had reinvented herself and vanished at least twice before in her life. Running was not her last resort. Running was her whole entire skill set. I found out because of Junie, sweet little 6-year-old Junie, who did not know one thing about blood types or marriage certificates or any of it. Everett had let me come by that evening to see the kids, the first time in weeks, because the walls were finally down between us, And I was sitting on the edge of Junie's bed reading her a story when she looked up at me with those big, serious eyes. And she said, "Grandma Addie, are you coming on the trip too?" And something went ice cold in my stomach. I kept my voice easy and I said, "What trip is that, baby?" And Junie said, "Mama's taking me and Reed on a fun trip really early in the morning. But it's a secret." She said, "Don't tell Daddy and don't tell Grandma. We already have the suitcases hid in the closet. I want you to understand what those words did to me." Bonnie was not going to stay and fight a custody battle she knew she would lose. She was going to disappear in the dark before dawn and take both of those children with her, one of them another man's son, the other one my son's daughter. And she was going to do it while everyone slept. And a woman who has built 3 fake lives already, a woman with cash and a talent for vanishing, if she got a head start with those kids, we might never find them again. Not ever. I had spent a career watching how fast things can go wrong in the space of a few minutes, and I knew right then we did not have until morning. I did not scream and I did not fall apart. I got up nice and calm. I kissed Junie good night, and I walked straight out to the kitchen, and I got Everett, and I told him low and fast exactly what his daughter had just said. And I watched the last of the denial burn out of my son's eyes, and something hard and awake take its place. He checked the guest room closet. 2 suitcases, packed tight, tucked behind the winter coats. And on the dresser, 3 one-way plane tickets for a 6 a.m. flight printed and ready. That is when it stopped being about proof and started being about getting to those kids in time. Everett called the police. And thank God, because by now this was not one family's mess anymore. There were legal filings started. There was a documented fraud. There was a real biological father. And taking those children out of state in the dead of night crossed every line there is. Custodial interference, they called it. And the fact that we had already started papers, that Grady's paternity was established, that there was a criminal history of a fake identity. All of it meant the police took it dead serious instead of writing it off as some domestic squabble. But she had already slipped out. By the time we checked, the guest room was empty and her car was gone from the driveway, and it was pushing 4 in the morning. She had heard something, or her animal instinct had simply told her the walls were closing, and she had grabbed those 2 babies and bolted for the airport ahead of schedule. My grandson, barely 3 weeks out from having his spleen removed and still not back to full strength, being hauled through the dark by a woman running from the law. I have never prayed so hard in my life as I did in the passenger seat of my son's truck, flying toward that airport with the police already ahead of us. And I will tell you, everything I ever learned about staying calm when a life is on the line, I needed every scrap of it that night, because Everett's hands were shaking on the wheel and somebody had to keep a clear head. They caught her at the security checkpoint. She had Reed by the hand, pale and confused and clutching his little backpack, and Junie half asleep on her hip, and she was trying to talk her way through with those 3 tickets when the officers stepped in front of her. And I got there just in time to see it, to see the exact moment Bonnie Ratliff understood it was finally, truly over. She did not cry. She did not beg. She just went blank and cold and empty. And I realized in that moment I was looking at the real face under all of it, the one from that old DMV photo, the hungry, cornered stranger who had been wearing my daughter-in-law like a costume for 8 years. Reed saw me and he pulled loose and he ran. And I dropped down on those airport tiles with my bad knees screaming, and I caught him, the way I caught him the very first day. And I held on to that boy like the whole world was trying to take him, and I would be damned if I let it. And here is the part I did not expect. Grady was there too. Roland had called him. And this big, quiet man saw his son for the very first time, standing in an airport at dawn. And he did not lunge and he did not grab, because he understood the boy did not know him from any stranger on the street. He just stood back with tears pouring down his face, giving that frightened child room. And Everett, my Everett, walked over to the man whose son he had raised as his own for 8 years, the 2 of them wrecked by the same woman, and for a long moment they just looked at each other. And then Everett put out his hand, and Grady took it. Two broken fathers, standing over one little boy, deciding right there without a single word that he was going to be loved by both of them instead of fought over between them. I would love to tell you it all wrapped up neat and pretty after that. It did not, and I promised you the truth from the start. The months that came after were hard, hard in a way I would not wish on anybody. Bonnie, whose real name really was Bonnie Ratliff, was charged. Bigamy, fraud, and the custodial interference from that night at the airport. The whole thing wound its way through the courts, and it was ugly and it was slow. And that guardianship she had talked my son into starting against me, that quiet little plan to have me declared out of my mind, it collapsed the second the truth came out, and I got my good name back, though I will be honest. Getting it back never quite feels as clean as losing it did. Everett had the hardest road of all of us, and it was not the road you would think. His hardest part was not losing her. It was forgiving himself. He could not stop circling back to it. That afternoon in the hospital cafeteria, when I first told him the truth and he called me sick and stood up and walked away, he carried a terrible guilt over that, over believing her instead of his own mother, over all the weeks he looked at me like I was crazy. And I had to tell him, more than once, sitting at my kitchen table with our hands wrapped around coffee cups, that there was nothing to forgive. She fooled everybody, son. She was a professional at fooling people. You are not a fool for trusting your wife. You are just a good man who got lied to by somebody who is very good at lying. It took him a long while to believe me. Some days I am not sure he fully does. The kids struggled too. Reed had nightmares for a stretch, and there were a lot of hard questions from a boy too young to hold answers that heavy. But children are tougher than we give them credit for, and slowly, week by week, he steadied. These days he has got two dads, and he will tell you so proud as anything. He says he has got Daddy and he has got Pop Grady, and Grady moved to a place just 15 minutes away, so he could be there for soccer games and scrape knees and all of it, showing up steady without ever once trying to erase the father that boy already had. Carlene, my sister, came to me and she cried and she apologized for every sideways look, for every time she nodded along when that woman called me confused. And I forgave her, because she is my sister and because that woman fooled her the same as she fooled everybody. And Franny, God bless Franny, who never doubted me for one single second, still meets me at that same diner every week. And every so often she looks at me over her coffee and she just says, "Told you, Addie." And she surely did. So that is my story. That is what happened to the grandmother nobody wanted at the table. And here is what 40 years of blood and dying finally taught me, standing on the other side of all of it. For 4 decades, I trusted blood to tell the truth. But blood only tells you where a person came from. It never tells you who they choose to become. Reed does not carry my son's blood. He never did. And I have watched two broken men decide, every single day, to love that boy anyway. That is when I finally understood. Family is not what runs in your veins. It is who refuses to walk out the door. They tried to erase me quiet, to make me doubt my own mind. So if I leave you with one thing tonight, let it be this. When people decide you no longer matter, do not disappear to make them comfortable. Stay. Speak. The truth is patient, and it always finds its way home.